Welcome to the Workforce Workshop Podcast, where we teach you how to locate, attract, hire, train, and retain your ideal workforce to grow your business. With years of research, professional experience, and guest interviews, we're empowering business leaders with the information they need to know to build their business. Enjoy today's episode.
Welcome to the Workforce Workshop Podcast. Let us get started with a brief introduction of our guest today, Dr. Thomas A. Parham, President at the California State University Dominguez Hills. Thomas A. Parham, Ph.D., is a family man who resides in Southern California area. He is known among his close circle as Dr. P. He is the 11th president at the California State University Dominguez Hills, a highly diverse metropolitan university primarily serving the South Central and South Bay areas of the Los Angeles County. Established in 1960, is one of the 23 campuses that comprise the California State University system, the largest system of the public higher education in the nation. Dr. Parham previously served as Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs and adjunct faculty member at the University of California in Irvine, where he had been since 1985. For the past 38 plus years, Dr. Parham has focused his research effort in psychological negligence and had authored and co-authored 6 books and almost 50 journal articles and book chapters. He has sustained a scholarly focus in the areas of racial identity development, African psychology, and multicultural counseling. Dr. Parham grew up in Southern California, has received his bachelor's degree in social ecology from the University of California in Irvine, his master's degree in counseling psychology at Washington, California in St. Louis, Missouri. He received his Ph.D. in counseling psychology at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. He's licensed to practice psychology in California. In addition to his duties as president, Dr. Parham is an active member of the community, contributing his talent in the areas of social advocacy, community uplift, and youth empowerment. With such a successful career, it would be extremely helpful for our audience to understand various aspects of being in the workforce from a different perspective. So let us begin with the questions. Shall we, Dr. Parham?
Let's go. How are you? And thank you for having me as part of the podcast today.
Thank you. I would like to begin with a brief introduction about the California State University Dominguez Hills and why CSU Dominguez Hills.
So, it's an interesting question because, as you mentioned in the introduction, the California State University is the largest system of public higher education in all of America. So the CSU really takes a backseat to nobody. I like that. I've been in higher education all of my professional life, first at the University of Pennsylvania as an Ivy League professor, then at the University of California, Irvine, as you mentioned, and now at Cal State University Dominguez Hills. But I like the CSU for lots of reasons. First, it educates a much broader swatch of the state citizen. Two, this Dominguez Hills campus comes out of social justice roots. Third, it has a population that really needs what we know. And so for me, this particular campus, located in a metropolitan urban space, is an ideal place for us to educate and train students. And personally, I believe that there really is no greater blessing in life next to being a parent than being entrusted with the personal and intellectual growth and development of young people. So anytime I get to contribute my talents to helping them grow and learn and prosper and develop, I'm loving it. So that's why Dominguez Hills.
So you almost touched into my next question, into why you accepted to be the president of the California State University Dominguez Hills.
You know, it's an interesting question, Chiraz, because being a university president is something I never planned on being. I'm a psychologist by training. I grew up with a mentor, the great Joe White. He was the father of the contemporary black psychology movement. And he taught me, as he was mentoring me at the University of California, Irvine, he said the key to mental health, particularly for a young black man, was to have a broad range of choices and options. So when I graduated from Irvine and I went to grad school, he said, I'm sending you to grad school. He said, but your goal is not to be just clinically good. He said, I want you to be academically good for instruction, research good for doing your scholarship, and then the rest will take care of itself. So when I became a professional and a psychologist, I prepared to be an academician, a clinician, a researcher, and a scholar, was then doing consultation, and then also had administrative tasks. So there are 5 functions that we have done in terms of that versatility of my career. So while the positions have changed, from Ivy League professor to then an administrator at Irvine, where I taught every year that I was there except 2, and then now a university president, in those early years of my career and even up to the time that I became president, the functions didn't change. The only thing that changed was the proportion of time I spent in each category. So when I was at Penn, I was a full-time faculty member, then a clinician part-time, and a researcher, because research one-years make you publish. I then was doing consulting with the city of Philadelphia, the school district, corporations, and then some administrative tasks. When I shifted to Irvine, I became an administrator. So I spent most of my time in administration. A little bit of time, I taught 2 classes as adjunct faculty, did my scholarship and research. I saw patients in the counseling center, but I had a clinical practice in the city of Irvine, and also got invited to do consultation. So those 5 things, that versatility of my career, which I think is a good space for our workforce to be in, you always have what we call, Chiraz, transferable assets, meaning your job title may not, logically transfer. I worked at McDonald's, but now I want to go work in a bank, and people think, I can't, do that. Well, yes, you can, because if you don't look at job title, but look at job function, the functions are transferable across multiple domains. So in my career, that's why. So when I became university president, long story short, it was an opportunity that I had been approached about, I don't know, probably 12 to 15 times, where you just get on people's list and executive search firms come to ask you, would you be interested? You've been nominated for this particular presidency. And they were happening all over the country, from the East Coast to the Midwest, to even a couple down south, and of course the West Coast. And I just didn't have any interest in wanting to move up in administration, because I thought it would restrict my activity to be in the classroom to teach, my clinical work with patients, and to do some of the consulting. But at some point, you just reach a plateau in your career where you've done enough and contributed enough in those spaces, where now it's time to make a contribution at a higher level. So developmentally, you're in that space. And again, as I said, Dominguez Hills was just the right fit for me because of the composition of the campus. And that's why it wasn't just me saying yes to the offer to apply for the position. I'm really thankful to the Chancellor Timothy White at that point, who's now retired. Joe Castro is the new Chancellor. And the Board of Trustees, who then said, yes, we'd like you to come, and we're going to offer you the position of being president at Dominguez Hills. So that's how I became the 11th president. That's amazing,
Dr. Parham. So let's talk now about something for people who are not from the CSU Dominguez Hills community. It's very hard to describe about the success of CSUDH, and we would like to highlight the success that CSUDH has had, during your tenure. If you can tell us about the success of CSUDH and its graduates, even though we are going through a pandemic, but we have to share with the world what CSUDH is witnessing during this time and the growth that CSUDH is going through.
You know, I appreciate the opportunity to really talk about Dominguez Hills and what that means. For me, talking about the success of the campus requires that we contextualize who our students are. So what is that Dominguez Hills experience like? So we're just shy of about 400 acres in an urban metropolitan place. We have 27,727 students that we were last enrolled with last year. Of those, I'm sorry, not 27,000, 17,727. Of those 17,000, we have 87%-ish students of color. So it's a minority serving institution. We've got 66% Latinx kids. That's about third most in the state. We have 12% African American students. That's the largest percentage of black students of any university, public university in the entire state of California. We have probably 8.5%, maybe 8% Asian American kids, maybe 6.5% Caucasian, less than 1% Native American. We've got 4% biracial. So you aggregate all that, we've got 87% students of color. So that's nice. So we have high underrepresented minority students. We have a high number of first generation students. 60+% of our students are first generation. 73% of our students receive Pell Grants, are Pell eligible. So Pell being that federal financial aid that's there. So 73% of our kids are Pell eligible, but 60% of them have an EFC. That's an acronym that stands for the expected family contribution of 0. That means the families are so poor that we don't expect them to pay a dime toward their education. And then I've got a large number of students who, through no fault of their own, come out of high schools that haven't adequately prepared them to manage the rigors of a university curriculum. And so we've got to put in spaces to do that for what is almost remedial or developmental learning. So when you think about highly underrepresented, high Pell eligible, high first generation, and high, right, in need of developmental education, there are some systems, if you stack universities top to bottom in California, there are some universities that have less than 0.5% of those variables in aggregate. And on top of that list are places like CSU Dominguez Hills that have almost 50%, maybe even a little more of our students who represent those 4 variables. So for me, I love it because that is the badge of honor that we are entrusted with the personal and intellectual growth and development of our young people. So what we're preparing in the workforce is the broadest swatch of diversity there. So when our students come out of that particular circumstance and then are able to thrive and master the rigors of a university education, both academic and co-curricular, do the internships, get the job possibilities, and then get out into the workforce, what you have is somebody who's not only academically prepared, but is life prepared because they've had to come through the challenges and trials and tribulations. There are a lot of them that are taking buses an hour and a half to get to, campus every day and back. They're coming from families that are multiple folk. They're dealing with poverty. They're dealing with, challenges in their life, healthcare issues. So they've had to overcome adversity in a way that lots of students don't. But all those are attributes and assets that are better preparing them for the world of work. And so they come out of there. So that's the context I wanted to share with you. Now, when you think about their success in the workforce, we have people who've come out who are, in a whole range. We have 69, almost 70 majors on campus right now across 6 colleges. So we have arts and humanities, business education and public policy. We have a college of education. We have a college of natural and behavioral sciences, a college of health, human services and nursing, and a college of extended and international education, CEIE. So out of those 69, 70 majors, and we're training these students every year to go out. So we have students who are coming out in accounting and business, or digital and media arts, or history majors and ethnic studies majors. We have folk who are in business and marketing. We have folk who are in the sciences. We have education. We train the 3rd most teachers who teach in the Los Angeles Unified School District right here on this campus. So they're doing lots of things. But if you think about alums and what they've been doing, I mean, you just look at the broadest swatch of them. 60% of our alumni, by the way, of over 100 and about 110,000 now, are within 25-mile radius of the campus. So they are contributing to both the South Central and South Bay regions and the workforce that are here. But what are they doing? They're the John Tracy's of the world, recently retired Chief Technology Officer for Boeing, who was a physics major here. There's the Karen Bass, who was in the state assembly and then left to then go serve in Congress, who was just recently the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus in D.C. We have Carmelita Jeter, world's fastest woman at one time.
Amazing.
Right? Who now is a track coach working with kids in the Midwest. We have the Tuolumne Austins, who was with Rock Nation and is now working with Sony, as one of their VPs. We have, those kind of folks, in those particular roles. Sam Enriquez, for example, who is now front page editor of the Wall Street Journal. I mean, so you look at journalism, communication, digital media arts, business, science, et cetera, teaching, nursing. There's nothing that folk do. Grace Ann Deakins, trauma surgeon. So that's the range of skills and abilities that our alumni have in that space. Steve Bradford, our own state senator, a Toro alum. I mean, that's who we're training. Former athlete, we just saw him this weekend, Clemente Gonzalez, who was a soccer athlete here, just finished a career in working with places like Aetna and now CVS, another place. I mean, there are people that are around everywhere. Toro's contributing to the workforce and what they do. That's the training that we try to provide our students.
Amazing. Knowing the data regarding students' profile at the CSU Dominguez Hills, what the university is doing to facilitate the career path for the graduates of CSUDH and to grow the list that you just mentioned of the successful alums that CSU has produced?
So the career path for our students, I think, starts with vision, because there are a lot of our students who have barely been off the block, let alone been across the state and around the country or the world. And I always remind folk that you cannot relate to a global world with only a local identity. So we try to expand it. So part of it is trying to provide them with the vision so that they come to CSUDH with a sense of confidence and efficacy that they can master the rigors of their academic and co-curricular learning opportunities and then move into these particular spaces. And so that is fundamental. The second fundamental we try to do is not simply expose them to a job or a career, because in higher education, we sometimes, I think, Chiraz, force students to make decisions too early. The average college student changes his or her major something like 1.6 times. Why is that? Because, right, they know about this much and they really ought to know this much. And so when you come in to the CSU and you're taking general education requirements, when you come into the UC and you're taking breadth requirements, you're supposed to take a little bit of everything across multiple domains until you get to your major, and then you specialize in a particular, area. And so I might be interested in medicine, but I like patient care, but I don't really like the science and the physics and the organic chemistry, etc. So I'm changing my major because I'm not thriving in this area, I'm thriving in that. I might want to work in the business career, but I might want to be an entrepreneur as opposed to just go work for a company. I might be in teaching, but I don't want to do higher ed. I want to do K-12 because I really want to get into the kids. Universities are places where you are able to discover those talents and look at that. So we're trying to provide folk through our career centers. As an example, we expose them to what we call decision-making models. So we're exposing them to interest. What are you interested in? Values. What are your values that you hold most important and dear? Attitudes. What are the attitudes you hold about a particular job or career? And skills. What are you good at? And so if you take interests, values, attitudes, and skills, and you can get good at those and then figure out what, job in the workforce matches those, then you can contribute to a high degree of occupational satisfaction and begin to rate. So we're trying to expose students not only to visions of possibility for different careers in different areas, but also the fundamentals of making good, sound decisions in their career. And then once they then begin to take classes and they supplement that with co-curricular learning and internship opportunities, they're then able to go out into the world of work better prepared to say, here's how I can use my skills as the assets that are necessary to contribute to the workforce.
Knowing that the CSU Dominguez Hills is preparing its graduates to contribute and to succeed in the workforce space. So how do we really kind of monitor that our students, the graduates from the CSU Dominguez Hills, stand out in the corporate world?
So standing out in the corporate world, I think, requires a couple of pieces. One, it requires exposure of the university to our friends in the corporate world to say, there's a hidden gem over there at Dominguez Hills. And so part of the challenge, of course, that we've had to wrestle with is helping people really understand the exceptional instructional faculty that we have and the academic horsepower that we carry at the campus, how wonderful our students are, and how capable they are of being able to navigate the world of work and the pathways to productivity and success. So part of it is that. The other part is making sure that we are exposing students to the opportunities to get out there into the world of work to just show what they can do, right? The best, there's no better predictor, Chiraz, of performance than performance itself. Exactly. So you can't come in and take a test on how to throw mail, then actually go in and, throw in mail. You can't, predict how to do anything better than going to do it yourself. So when we get our students out in digital media arts, working in business, working in law firms, working in criminal justice arena, working in science and technology, working in aerospace, working in construction, working in mental health, working as a physician, then they show what they do. When our nurses get out, we get feedback all the time that say, wow, we really value the training your nurses have. And we look at the specialties that we have. We have in our health, human services, and nursing, we have an online nursing program that trains lots of nurses in the area, so the healthcare is wonderful. But we've also got occupational therapy. The discipline was threatening to change its requirements from the master's degree now to the doctorate. So we have just been approved as one of 2 universities in the entire state of California, public universities, the only one in Southern California to offer a doctorate in occupational therapy that will start in 2023. Well, people are also celebrating us to say, wow, you train your occupational therapists real well. We're looking at our orthotics and prosthetics, maybe one of 8 in the nation, that we are working with not just the wounded warriors, bless their soul, for taking care of us, but we're also working with those folk who, through healthcare challenges like diabetes, obesity, etc., need artificial limbs, etc., to do that, or some kind of disease. Well, we're serving the healthcare needs of the community right here with one of the few around in not just the state, but the whole region and the nation. So it's those kind of things that people are now discovering about Dominguez Hills. And I'm fond of telling folk, as I do, and I've shared this with you even, that this is not your grandmother's Dominguez Hills any longer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dr. Parham, equity and diversity inclusion is a hot universal topic today. And if you can tell us about what the CSU Dominguez Hills leadership is doing to help our students, our graduates, to work out the new diversity inclusion solutions that we are living in this time.
So the first thing we do is try to teach our students what real diversity and inclusion is. If you go into most corporate venues, and you say, you're not very culturally diverse, they'll say, oh, yes, we are. The first thing they'll go, I'll say, well, prove it. The first thing they'll do is say, we have 5% of this and 10% of that and 15% of the other. It tells you that they relegate diversity to demographics. And we try to invite our students to remember that diversity is much more than demographics. Diversity is really more of a question. I borrowed this question from a book that was written by Marilyn Loden and Judy Rosner. Judy Rosner, a friend of mine from back at UC Irvine, way back in the day, maybe 1991. It's called Workforce America. But they gave one of the best definitions of diversity that I found, because they said diversity is a question. And the question, Chiraz, is not what is the demographic composition of your company, but rather, do the policies and practices of your institution or agency change as a function of the changes in the demographics? So if you used to be an all male and now you have 50% female, but you still conduct it, right, with the values that are male and masculine centered, you haven't changed anything. And most corporations don't understand the difference between a desegregated environment and a truly integrated one. They don't understand the difference between, in my mind, the skin color of an applicant and the consciousness of an applicant. So you could put somebody black on the Supreme Court, but if they make decisions just like their white counterpart, nothing changes. Exactly. You can put a woman as a CEO in charge of a company, but if she makes decisions just like her male counterpart, nothing changes.
Exactly.
You can take somebody who's physically challenged or LGBTQ or questioning, and in that space, and put them in charge of a company, but if they make decisions just like their more able-bodied or their heterosexual counterpart, nothing changes. And that's why I love that definition, because if we really get down to interrogating, which is what we try to teach our students, the policies and practices of an institution, and see how they are changing, then I think you begin to get to a greater level of diversity, inclusion, and equity. I also want to say this, because I've learned in my life to put 5% emphasis on what people say and 95% emphasis on what people do. Don't tell me, show me. So we as a campus, even as we have been emerged out of the social justice roots of the 60s, when we were first founded in 60, the campus was scheduled to be in Palos Verdes. 5 years later, as they start to put buildings up and grow the curriculum, etc., the Watts Rebellion occurs in South Central. Governor Brown, along with city fathers in Carson and Gilson and those folk, got together and said, we have to create a gateway and a door of opportunity for the residents of the urban core of South Central Los Angeles. So we as a campus are sitting right at the elbow joint between the South Bay to the west, South Central to the north, and we're right there in the city of Carson. So we come out of social justice roots, bravo. But we can't have our students coming on campus thinking that just coming out of social justice roots is enough to satisfy a diversity quotient. So we're saying, so I have to model what we expect. So I've created an anti-racism task force just this past year. And right before COVID was impacted, and we're still continuing that. And it's chaired by two of our both academic and administrative heads. But people say, well, why would you do that, Parham? We already got a black president. We already got, they're thinking demographics. I'm saying what Dominguez Hills cannot do is become passive participants to our own social justice history and act like we don't have to fundamentally interrogate the question of whether or not we have been infected with that mental and social disease of racism and sexism and classism, etc. So we've got to examine our own policies and practices internally. We've got a gender equity task force that does the same thing. So we're looking at diversity across these different domains. So we're not only training students, but trying to model for students what real diversity looks like. So by the time they get out into the workforce, they don't just represent a demographic, but they represent a consciousness that can bring something as an asset to that particular workplace.
You joined the CSUDH about 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. It was a great turning point in terms of development, change, growth. And when you joined the CSUDH, I'm sure you had faced few challenges. My question is, what was those challenges, And how did you address them, especially when you were trying to face internal culture change?
So, great question. I gotta think about this one a minute. So, first of all, when I joined CSUDH, I have to give a lot of credit to former President Willie Hagan, who left the shop pretty intact. So there's no scandals I had to address. There's no, major thing I had to clean up, even though you always want to tinker with things and try to make things better. But I came in, I think, with probably 4 main goals. And that led to me discovering what the 2 biggest challenges would be. So first, I wanted to examine the strategic plan, to look at the level of convergence and divergence between what the campus said it was going to do and what it actually did. Secondly, I wanted to, do the best we could at contributing to student success. So I want our students to be successful. So we had to improve retention rates, persistent rates, graduation rates. Third, I wanted to turn Dominguez Hills into a destination campus, not a default campus. I'll go to Dominguez Hills because I didn't get in somewhere else. I wanted to turn it into a destination campus. So we had to really figure out what is it that would drive students here and make students say, I want some of that. That's the way I think. And then fourth, we had to change the mindset of the campus to the external world and begin to cultivate some interest and investment, right, from people externally. So with those 4 goals coming in, it also represented, I think, 2 challenges. And so there was an internal one and an external one. Externally, the challenge was to try to invite the community outside of these walls, residential, civic, government, educational, corporate community, to understand that, as I said before, this is not your grandmother's Dominguez Hills anymore. And that if I don't have to create excellence, I just have to peel it back and reveal some of the excellence that already exists on this campus that you maybe didn't know outside. So one of the ways we've done that is partnering, for example, with the LAEDC and Bill Allen and that team to host the Future Forums, where we're able to highlight a lot of the excellence that goes on campus and some of the things that we do. So we've changed, I think, the image of the campus. We've come in and 10-year accreditation from WASC. That's gold standard speak in higher education. We've come in and gotten our business school accredited. First time in 27 years we've been able to do that. And working with the provost and I with the faculty and other folk in the College of Business Administration and Public Policy and our Dean Joseph Wynn. So now that school is AACSB accredited. Looking at some of those things, we've also had to look at the infrastructure and put plans in place to be able to get the buildings done and to create a mindset where we can actually put a master plan in place. So I had to go meet with city officials, community residents, and other folks to say, here's the master plan. So externally that was about, but it also revealed the internal challenge. Because internally people were used to, that's just Dominguez Hills. And I came and I went, because we have to think about it. We had to really challenge folk to dream about what was possible and not simply settle for what was traditional or predictable. And so it was that dreaming that has allowed us to say, don't you want more for our students? Don't you want a different infrastructure? Don't you want a different standard of excellence? Don't you want these things? And it's really pushing that vision of possibility that has allowed folk to really step up and rise to the occasion. And now almost everything we touch on this campus is coming up gold. I'm loving it.
Amazing. Timing is everything.
Uh-huh.
Our graduates are, with all the statistics that you just mentioned about, we are the highest in diversity probably in the nation. Our graduates are, correct?
Certainly in the state. And there are some places, for example, that are historically black colleges and universities that have a higher percentage of all black students.
Sure.
But when you think about the multicultural mix that we represent in California, 87%, we're probably top 10, right,
Wow.
percent of all institutions in the country that have that mix of folk. So when our corporations and the workforce are out there looking for a diverse workforce, you don't have to go place and try to find it. You can come right here to Dominguez Hills.
Exactly, and that was my next question about how those organizations and corporations can have access. I myself in the workforce, and we're desperately looking for diverse labor and diverse workforce. So how can the California State University Dominguez Hills work with those organizations and corporations just, to facilitate the exchange and the collaboration in terms of, sharing their workforce?
Great question. So as we're coming out of the pandemic, right, we have been through just something, unseen in our lifetime.
Yeah.
But it's a great time, I think, to be part of the Toro Nation and to see what's going on. And so we're looking for our corporate community and the workforce entities outside to be strategically engaged with the campus. So there are lots of ways to do that. There are some corporations that can join our corporate advisory boards. I'm getting ready to start a new one, in fact, for probably the office of the president, but our business schools and nursing programs and other stuff have these kind of boards that are available throughout that. They can come engage with our career center, right, to be able to host forums on campus where they come and talk about careers in this particular area so that students then come and talk about that. They can come and meet with particular faculty who train students in particular ways to say, let me see if we can't. So we've hosted everybody on campus from corporations all the way up to government agencies like the CIA and other folks who say, we're looking for talent. Wow, we didn't know you were here. We're now coming on campus. We can sponsor lecture series where we come, whether we're doing the Future Forum, we do the economic forecast now for the South Bay. There are lots of those things, and corporations can come be a part of that. So between career centers, faculty, providing internship opportunities for students so they get a little taste of what our students can do, coming to meet with the career center, engaging with faculty, being a part of our philanthropic board, working with different auxiliary enterprise on campus, coming to be part of that, being part of our just strategic engagement where corporations are looking to invest their bounty and their resources into scholarship opportunities, etc. There are all kinds of ways for the community to get involved and engaged with students. They can host day on the job, so that if you have a corporation and say, I'd like to invite a group of folk to come out from Dominguez Hills, we can arrange that and bring, busloads or carloads of students to be able to come out and look at that, whether it's criminal justice or business or healthcare or whatever. So there's all kinds of ways to do it.
We sit in the backyard of major corporations here in the South Bay. If one of our audience is listening to this podcast and they would like to help in any way, what's the message you want to tell them, just to invite them so they can partner and so we can collaborate with them to share our workforce and our graduates' talent?
So the message I would share with them is that we are blessed in this LA region, Chiraz, with a whole range of intellectual horsepower and academic institutions. But there are very few like CSUDH. Very few people have the diversity we have. Very few people have the talent and the students we have who've had to overcome challenges and adversity so that when they're ready to go out in life and accept the challenges of just living in this world, they are much better prepared to be able to do that in terms of also the academic majors that go along with that. When they want to come to a campus that represents not just the diversity in terms of skin color and demographics, but mindset and cultural consciousness and social justice efforts and sentiments that are expressed by the students, this is a place to be able to go. And so if you're only looking at some of the other traditionals and you haven't looked at Cal State University Dominguez Hills, you're missing something. And I would invite them to come and take a look at what it is that we do.
What's the biggest misconception people outside the CSU Dominguez Hills community have about this campus?
Maybe sometime that our students aren't quite as smart or good or talented. Maybe that They come from circumstances like poverty, it's in neighborhoods, etc., that they're maybe less than capable. If I were summarizing all of that, Chiraz, I would remind our audience that people come from circumstance, but they are not their circumstance. They may come from poverty, but their spirits can still be rich. They may come from violent surroundings, but still have a peaceful heart. They may come from spaces where they may not have performed as well on a test, but that does not diminish the intellectual capability that that student, him or her, has been blessed with. You know, when you're looking for women leaders, and we're doing lots of work, we have among our demographics, not just 87% students of color, but 65% of our students are women. So if you want to know who is training the women leaders of tomorrow, CSU Dominguez Hills is. I mean, those are the kind of things that we're very proud of here, but we don't want people to sleep on the fact that people come from a whole range of circumstances in their life, but they are not their circumstance. And we should never allow, right, people's potential to be limited by other people's limited imaginations of them. We want to be able to elevate their due and just expose students to the world and expose the corporate community to the talent and expertise that exists right here on this campus.
Dr. Parham, please enlighten our audience about the CSU Dominguez Hills entrepreneurship program.
Sure. Earlier in our conversation, you asked me about what we were doing to prepare students for the world of work. And I shared with you that not only were we providing them with vision of possibility about what the opportunities were, we were also exposing them to decision-making models. And we were allowing those to be coupled with the both academic and co-curricular learning opportunities that gave them the didactic and experiential learning opportunities to be able to look at opportunities out there. But part of that is we're teaching our students as well, Chiraz, to be critical thinkers. We're teaching them to challenge the biases and assumptions they bring with them into, right, this academic space. We are teaching them to accumulate and acquire and study more facts and data so that they can form more cogent and persuasive arguments. And what those things do in combination is it invites students to consider that maybe I don't want to work for Corporation X over here. Maybe I want to develop an entrepreneurial space myself. Excuse me. So as students do that, what a lot of folk are doing is working through our Entrepreneur Center, working through our Center for Innovation, David Ochi, and they are being trained, and we are trying to cultivate the different ideas that our students have, you know, in those particular spaces. And so we have a number of students who are in that space. But also, the exciting thing about the Entrepreneur Center is we aren't trying to restrict entrepreneurship simply to students at Dominguez Hills, because that Entrepreneur Center is also engaging other folk out in the community that can invite them in to say, let's see if we can help you cultivate some of your ideas as well in that space. So we're real excited about what's going on with that, and having just built that new building for the Center for Business Administration and Public Policy, that college is going to be in there to our new Innovation and Instruction building. That new Entrepreneur Center will have a new home in there as well. And we expect it to go gangbusters in terms of what's going on. So we expect a lot of activity out of there as students learn to develop their own entrepreneurial ideas going forward.
Dr. Parham, how was COVID-19 has affected CSU Dominguez Hills and its students and leadership as well?
So COVID has been severe. It is a global pandemic, as you know. I remember being in Washington, D.C. in early March of 20. And news about COVID was just beginning to break as people were deciding, you know, whether to, you know, elbow, touch hands, you know, face coverings weren't real prevalent then. And we got called home. I was on Capitol Hill, March the 10th, I remember. And I was actually supposed to be going from DC to Sacramento to do some legislative advocacy up with, California legislators. But we got called home to say, we're shutting it down. Everybody has to be home. So we did ours by Zoom and virtual. All my meetings that next day on the 11th, right there. So COVID made a big impact that way. But I want to talk about the impact that it's had, not simply medically and change the ambiance of the way in which we do stuff, where we're going to now a virtual reality, but that pivot has been hard on our students. One, since I have a lot of these brown and black kids, their families have been the most vulnerable to the disease. So they've had extreme loss of life and challenge that they've had to deal with in those spaces. We went to a virtual space, and understand the assumption here. Let's just pivot and go virtual. Well, with students so challenged sometimes, there's some of my students who don't even have computers. So we had to ramp up our computer loan program to be able to make sure students had devices. They may have a computer, but only, they need a hotspot, or they're used to going down to the Starbucks because the Wi-Fi in their home or the signal is not very good, but now the Starbucks is closed, or the local coffee shop or whatever they happen to be going. So all that has happened in the context of that. And so we have tried to calibrate really the learning loss that has been impacted by that. And we struggled through that first semester to finish, late March, April, and May until that last class graduated. But this last class is really the first year to be able to come through where they've done pretty much almost the entire year virtually. So it's been a challenge. But the COVID crisis, the pandemic, is only one element of the crisis that has impacted our students. Because we had a financial crisis that was caused by COVID, state budget cuts that certainly impacted this campus. But then we've also had a social justice crisis. So you have a tripartite series of crises with not just the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and Brown Lives Matter and Women Lives Matter, but the killing and the assault and murder of these black lives has made a difference. And so it's had an awakening to the social justice conscience of people, whether they are black, white, blue, brown, or purple. And so when you think about that, you've had really a tripartite crisis of COVID pandemic, financial challenges, and the social justice piece. Now, what does that mean? For us, I taught my team that crisis for us does three things. Crisis reveals character. It certainly did, right, in our last administration in the White House. Character on full display. But crisis also exposes weakness in an organization or entity. It certainly did for us as we looked at some of the challenges we had. But crisis also provides opportunity. So we use the crisis as an opportunity. And what I said to folks is that as people were looking at the crisis and saying, how we're going to recover, et cetera, I was fond of saying, in fact, you and I had an even conversation about this in Foundation, where I said, I'm not interested in recovering back to a doggone thing. Because when you recover psychologically, it assumes that what you're recovering back to was normal and healthy in the first place, and it wasn't. So what I've said is when I come out of this pandemic, I want to transform this campus and transform it to a plateau and a threshold where it should have been all along, relative to budget and facilities, etc., not simply recover back to the way it was. And that's what we've really put our focus on in peace. So in this space, I didn't stop construction in COVID. I kept going because crisis is an opportunity. So now we have 3 new buildings that we're prepared to open when we reopen the campus that's there. If we want to know how we're training folk in this new science lab and the College of Business and new residence halls that students can come be on campus, we have an esports lab we've opened up where we're training folk, right, in how to do, coding and basic math and science and writing, etc., to develop those skills that are going to help them better manage the rigors of a university curriculum, but also be able to be functional workplace skills outside technological sophistication-wise. That's what we've done in the midst of COVID. So we're hopefully getting ready to come out of COVID as the state opens up and the nation begins to open up, and hopefully we don't regress back too far. But we want to be able to do that. But that's been what's important, and that's what our students have been training themselves to be able to do and to adjust.
COVID-19 has taught us all how to think about the unforeseen and deal with the unforeseen, and a lot of things came out of COVID. The social the social justice, Black Lives Matter, all those social issues that they have been probably pushed, aside for a long time. Now, as a leader of the CSUDH community, how can the CSU help or participate just to solve the universal hot topic of the equity and diversity inclusion in today's workforce environment?
So one of the things that we can help doing is like, we are a campus that is poised and prepared to be able to navigate this world of diversity, inclusion, and equity in a way in which is very different, because our students are trained with a social justice mindset and focus to be able to do that. Our students don't come from privilege, right, by and large, even though we have some privileged students here. Most of them come from circumstances that they have to navigate all those things we talked about earlier today. The other piece I would say is that one of my heroes, Chiraz, was Dr. King. And Dr. King was saying that there comes a time when silence is betrayal. And so when he says to us that in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. It isn't that the rest of the world and the corporate community doesn't see the craziness going on in life. When George Floyd was murdered by the black police officer, he wasn't the first black person to be murdered. When Latasha Harlins lost her life, she wasn't the first person to be killed. That kind of abuse and violence against women and children and black lives and brown lives and LGBT lives, etc., is not the first. But it's one of the first times in my lifetime where I've seen a coalition of people stand up to say, this don't go no more. That we are going to stand up and take a stand and use our voice and be courageous drum majors, as Dr. King used to say, to be able to step out and be drum majors for justice and peace and righteousness. And so as corporations and the workforce, etc., are now looking to say, how do we develop an equity and social justice agenda? The challenge for them is to move past demographics and say, I've done my part because I hired 2% of this and 3% of that and 5% of that. No. Part of what they've got to do is challenge themselves with partners like CSUDH to say, how can we develop a more inclusive equity agenda where we are creating social justice policies and practices that positively impact the lives of folk? For example, you're a corporation out there and you're looking for something to do with your assets. I have students on this campus, because they're so poor, who are working 2 and 3 jobs. For every $5,000 scholarship that I can have, that's probably 10 hours of work a week we can take off the backs of one of our students, to then get them back in the classroom, back in that mentoring lab with that faculty member, back in that library, and not transitioning, trying to do 2 and 3 jobs. For every $1 million I can create, that is $205,000 scholarships or $420,500 scholarships that I can give to students to take that work off of their backs, to just help them just thrive and grow and study and learn. So they finish faster, they finish smarter, and they're not having to balance, the other things that everybody has to attend to. And that, I think, makes the biggest difference. That's where equity, right, rubber hits the road. When you really want to make a difference, not just diversifying your workforce, that's helpful, but really getting out there and contributing to the uplift of communities of color, like campuses like the CSUDH.
A lot of folk in the world talk about diversity, inclusion. You are the man with the boots on the ground who dealt with this subject for the entirety of your career in psychological negligence, racial identity, development, African psychology, and multicultural counseling. What's your view about this topic?
So Diversity is probably one of the most important things that we can do, but not just because it's politically correct. I mean, part of what, I have a warrior spirit. I've always been a social justice warrior. But part of that spirit comes out of a need to create a different level of dignity and respect for each person's humanity, whether you are white, black, blue, brown, or purple. We live in a world that still judges people by color, that refuses to see that racism and white supremacy are ideological and social constructs that operate in too many spaces, not just in this nation, but around the world. And that the goal of all of us should be to try to interrogate our own institutional policies and practices and even our own dinner table conversations to find out whether or not they've been infected with that disease. And so the goal, as we think about the real path toward diversity, equity, and inclusion, it isn't that hard to figure out what the right thing to do is. As long as we get inside our heads and our hearts and interrogate where the biases and assumptions are and how do I take those out, and just begin to accept people for being the capable, wonderful human beings and all God's children that we are. But we grow up in ways where privilege is given, not necessarily earned. Resources are taken, not necessarily developed. People are oppressed, not necessarily cultivated. And so as long as we have those activities going on, we'll still have to put more space into and more effort into really growing our diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives. But fundamentally, beyond the programmatic initiatives, beyond other things that happen, it fundamentally starts with respecting the dignity and humanity of each member of the human family. And if you're going into corporations, you've got to be able to put in a formula, if you will. You've got to have 3 ingredients: a cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and spiritual pledge of support. Somebody has to say this stuff is important. And it has to start from the top up and the bottom down, bottom up and top down. 2, you have to have sound programmatic planning. So everything from recruiting a competent and diverse workforce to programs within the workplace, I think, are important as well. But 3rd, and probably the single most important ingredient missing from our diversity, equity, and inclusion is accountability. Someone has to be held accountable for that. You and I, run businesses, Mine higher education, yours in the corporate world. If we come in $100,000 over budget or squandering money, our jobs are on the line. Why? Because we value fiscal integrity. But if somebody doesn't meet a diversity goal, what happens? Nothing. Why? Because we don't hold diversity up to the same standard that we do fiscal integrity. What we've got to do is begin to hold people accountable, both individually and systemically, to be able to make the kind of change, that we expect to see in the world.
What impact does CSU Dominguez Hills have on equity and diversity and inclusion to prepare our graduates to go to the workforce and be ready for this change that we are going through?
So again, our impact starts with the percentage of students that we train every year and cultivate. Our impact is further enhanced by the training they receive, both academic and co-curricular wise. The impact happens from the modeling that we do on campus that allows folk to actually see diversity in action. And the impact happens when students graduate from this place and are able to then go out into the workforce, not just representing a demographic with skin color, but a consciousness to say that I understand that true diversity and equity and inclusion is related to being able to impact the policies and practices of an institution or agency because of the demographic that I represent, whether or not it's race, ethnicity, gender, age, physical ability, or sexual orientation.
Tell us about your vision to create a better workforce through the upcoming graduates and really expect a higher and more effective results based on the psychological expertise that you have in this field, just so we can reach the results of real equity, real diversity, inclusion.
So one of the things that is probably best for us is, and this is where, the psychology comes in. We have a diversity of majors, 69, 70 of them, 6 colleges that we do training in, 17,727 students who are there. But being able to train them to go out and be the best prepared they can be in that also starts psychologically with a sense of confidence and a sense of self-efficacy that allows them to believe and understand that they can actually not only penetrate the workforce, but make real and substantial contributions. So we're in the space of teaching students that you have to be able to approach a task understanding that what you do is significant, is worthwhile, and it makes a difference. It's that pride that people have in that space. That's what's part of this demeanor, if you will, in what we call the Toro Nation.
As a respected leader, what would you like to tell the students who are transitioning to a new career path and are trying to make a difference in the United States, in this nation, and around the world?
The best advice I think I can give students as a university leader and president is probably summed up in 4 or 5 phrases. Produce excellence, and excellence will bring you opportunity. Be versatile and be prepared to apply your skills across a broad array of human endeavors. Be humble and be prepared to learn without going into space and thinking you know it all. Every moment is a teaching moment, is what we try to teach our students. Have integrity about your work, about your word, and about the outcomes that you produce, and be prepared to stand behind them. And try to mix all that, with fun. Because you've got to be able to whistle while you work. You've got to be able to keep things light. You've got to be able to not take yourself so seriously that you lose the capacity to just be in the moment, and engage people. I would also say that you can never find out how strong you can be until your moment of greatest vulnerability. So if we're training students, most people think that strength is measured from the 0 line forward. 0 to positive 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. This is not where strength is to me. You'll never find out how strong you can be, Because strength is not measured at a positive 8. That's strong. But you'll never find out how strong you can be until you're way down here at a negative 2, 4, 6, or 8. And you've had to overcome so much adversity, and now you're at a positive 6 or positive 8. You've had to come from way back here to here. You'll never find out how strong you can be to your moment of greatest vulnerability. So vulnerability is power. And so don't run, from challenge. There will always be students, employees, instances of unjustified suffering, unmerited pain, and undeserved harm, as my friend Cornel West reminds us. The question is not the stuff happening in your life, but rather, how will you sustain some movement and momentum in the face of the adversity that you're confronting? And if you can keep persevering through that adversity, I think you'll be fine, because challenge is just a part of paying your dues. And lastly, you just have to keep the faith and know that and trust that the way you've been prepared, particularly at institutions like California State University Dominguez Hills, you are prepared to improve your trajectory right? That makes a difference. One of the reasons why we are winning awards from the Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation for increasing the social mobility of students. And now we have national rankings in that particular area is because for the amount of investment the students make and the trajectory that they're now on and the salaries they now command out in the workforce, that's why they know their education made a difference in places like the Toro Nation. But you just got to keep the faith and keep on keeping on.
This discussion was indeed insightful, not only for me, but also for our audience. We hope that in this session, you have witnessed the vision, the passion of Dr. Parham and how he's committed to nurture, empower students whose lives are part of his personal mission statement, transforming lives that transforms America. With this, I would like to thank you, Dr. Parham, for taking out the time for this discussion and throwing light on a perspective that's new for the future of our nation and the world. So I hope you enjoyed this interview, and I will see you soon in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Workforce Workshop podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Links to everything discussed will be in the description. To contact us, click the link in the show notes, and you could submit your questions or share your story. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.